All right. Well, I'm Anne Kelly from Slow Food Hunter Valley, and I'm just going to do an acknowledgement of place because we always have start all of our communications with that. Yeah. So, Slow Food Hunter Valley acknowledges that we live and work on the land of the Wonnarua, Worimi, and Awabakal people who cared for and shared the abundance of Mother Earth sustainably for thousands of years. They inspire us in our vision of good, clean, and fair food for all. We wish to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging, and we honour the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people continue to play within Australia and the slow food community. So I'm Anne Kelly. I'm the leader of Slow Food Hunter Valley, and I think Vanessa Googled up something about gardens and up popped Slow Food Hunter Valley. We're a part of an international movement called Slow Food. It's a grassroots movement that started in 1989 when McDonald's wanted to put an outlet in Rome, and the Romans were quite incensed about this idea of putting a fast food outlet in their beautiful city. So the movement started there, and its aim is to prevent the disappearance of local food cultures, and it counteracts the rise in fast life and combats people's dwindling interest in the food that they eat, where it comes from, and how our food choices affect us and the world around us. So it's now in 160 countries across the world, and our mission is to access good, clean, and fair food for all. So it's since those early days, it's developed into a bit more of a bigger picture about what we do. So we're sort of interested in culture, politics, and agriculture, and the environment, and we're doing quite a lot of work in the climate change sphere at this moment. And we believe that through our food choices, we can collectively influence how food is cultivated, produced, and distributed, and change the world as a result. So a lot of big, motherhood type statements. But basically, because it's a grassroots organisation, if its main office is in Italy, in Bra in Italy, but each convivium or group has its own, does its thing in its own area without any overbearing, we don't have any directions from the top about exactly what we must do. We just do what works in our situation. So, if the people in Africa do a lot of work in gardens in Africa, small community gardens with schools and that sort of thing. If you're in Noosa, you might do some work in restaurants and getting people to make sure that they're choosing good food, good produce. In the Hunter Valley, we are working at the moment with our small producers. We have quite a history of food production in the Hunter, so we're trying to work on developing that and bring it back to a little bit, and those sort of things. So basically, our main front to the public in Maitland, or in the Hunter Valley, Maitland, we're basically based in Maitland. That seems to be where most of our members are. Is that we run an earth market, which is a fresh food market twice a month. It's an earth market is part of the slow food markets. There are 78 across the world, and we're lucky to have one of them in Maitland. So they have special rules. The producers must come and sell their own produce. We only sell fresh food. There's no, crafts and arts and that sort of stuff. There's just fresh food. And the food has to be produced fairly sustainably, not organic necessarily, but as best as we can do, considering our conditions. And so that's been going for 5 years. It started with a rescue where we rescued a farmer had a whole 20 tons of pumpkins that the supermarket said we can't have those. They've got dirt on them. We don't want them. So he was going to plough them in. So we sold that 20 ton of pumpkins just through our social media channels and getting on the news and stuff. And that was the beginning of the market and our involvement with supporting our local farmers to be able to operate outside the supermarket system, where they have very little control about what happens to their produce at times. That's one of our things. So we also do food rescue. So our connections with farmers means that we're aware of the amount of stuff that does get tossed away, and it becomes, because there's too much of it, or it's got spots on it, or whatever, it's got holes in it, or whatever. So we rescue all of that food. We make about 6,000 meals a year, which are donated to the community centre in Maitland and are distributed by them. And we also work with OzHarvest in that capacity. So they give us, we don't get much protein from our farmers, it's mostly veg. So they give us protein and other sorts of things from the supermarkets. We work with them. And that's been going on for about, I think, quite a long time, 5 or 6 years now. So that's a big part of our work. We also are in partnership with Council for the Maitland Seed Library. There's seed libraries all over the Hunter now, but I think Maitland was actually the first. So the Slow Food members source the seed, the local seed, and the council helps us distribute that through their library channels. So the aim of that is to be having local seed. Australia imports around about 85% of its total seed. And that's controlled by 4 or 5 enormous seed companies who have all sorts of who make all sorts of restrictions on their farmers, and often the seed that they sell them is not, they can't harvest that again. It's been modified or whatever. So some of those farmers get themselves into all sorts of trouble with it by being slaves to those seed companies. So our idea is to have some seed sovereignty. And we've got a little bit of a community gardens project going on as well. We've got some native demonstration gardens that we've developed in the last couple of years where we're growing the local native food, and you can come and have a look at those and possibly grow some of your own garden. And we've supported school gardens locally, and we also advocate for food equity and the rights of small producers. So we're in the business of biodiversity is our #1 thing with Slow Food. Then food equity is another thing. Advocacy for small producers, and education. So that's sort of what Slow Food. I know it sounds a lot, but that's what we do. And we have a good website of our own, and we also have the international website in Italy. So if you want to find out about Slow Food, that's how you can do it. We've got, our Facebook site's very good, and the website's good too. So I am a teacher. I sort of retired. I only do 2 days a week now, but what I do is I teach kids how to garden and cook. And we deliver at Talara, where I teach, we deliver the Stephanie Alexander Kitchen Garden Program to 180 kids a fortnight, which is huge. And they are on the program for 3 years. And my role is a garden specialist, but I also a kitchen specialist too. And I'm going to talk a little bit about 2 methods of gardening that we use in the garden in our kitchen, in our school garden, and that's no-dig gardens and container gardening. So that's a bit of a brief about who I am and what we do. Okay, so there's lots of information out there about both of these gardening methods. So no-dig garden and gardening in small spaces, or container gardening. And I'm not an expert on it. I haven't got a degree in gardening or anything, but I just learned from experience, I suppose. And my family was always gardeners, so I've always been interested in gardening. And for me, both of those methods have worked really well in the situation at school. And I also have that sort of thing happening at home. I've got a very small garden at home, so I've got containers just to increase the amount of space I use. Okay, so I think you have a list of some things that you might need for no-dig gardens, just material, to make an edging around to find the area, some smothering materials to kill off grass and stuff. Some of the things that you would need to layer for layers in your garden, we need water and of course some tools. So why do a no-dig garden? Well, in my situation at school, the reason was that Talara School is built on a hill and it's a clay pit. So we had some construction there a few years ago, and when they dug up the soil, you could have had a brickyard there. So it's very common in the Hunter, there's a lot of clay around. So that soil can be really hard to work with, very difficult to dig in, especially in dry weather. It's just dispiriting to try and work with solid clay. So putting a no-dig garden on that sort of soil is a really good way to start. So even though clay, for instance, is very hard, when it's wet, it's actually quite a rich mineral soil. So if you can actually garden in that clay, you get the benefits of it, but getting started is quite difficult. So and I guess the other reason to do it is it's just much easier to lay a garden down and dig up the soil, any sort of soil really. You just don't have to dig it up, so it takes a lot less work especially as you get older. And you can also build them on like asphalt and solid surfaces. There's plenty of places where people have put them on concrete, so they can work there. And they wouldn't grow big trees there, but they would grow surface rooting type greens and stuff like that, salad veg and things. Once you get a bit of depth in there, so they can grow they can be put on permanent on surfaces like that you want to use that are otherwise useless, and for greening and cooling. And they're also good for mobility, so you can raise them up. So rather than being on the ground, you can put them on something, give them a bit of height, and then you've got people who can't bend very well or whatever. They've got some access to them, easier access to them. So particularly if they're on a hard surface underneath, you can build them up, and then they work really well. All right, so with all gardens, you have to choose your aspect. There's no good sticking a garden under a tree when there's no sun. If you want to get vegetables, you have to have 6 hours of sun a day at least. That's sort of the minimum. So you need to find somewhere that's going to give you that. Spots with afternoon shade are probably preferable in our climate, because the summer sun in the afternoon can be grueling, and things just don't like it too much. So if you get some afternoon shade is good. So a north-northeast type of aspect is perfect. Westerly sun is good for the winter. So you could, if you wanted to do a garden and rest it in the winter and the summer, then you could do it. You could just have a winter garden. And there is some talk about people with the climate change looking at having the winter as our productive time and the summer as our rest time, rather than in the northern, where it's snowy or colder, you have your winter as rest and your summer as your production. So, if you haven't got a spot, you could look at it that way and try and sort of switch how you think about it, and just have your winter time as your productive time and your summer as your rest. Otherwise, you can provide some shade. So in my garden at school, which is northwesterly, I put shade up in the summer so that the plants get a bit of a break from that afternoon sun. So size, they can be any size you want really, but probably the rule for them is that they're wide enough so you can reach them. You can reach the soil from the side, and that you don't stand on the garden. So any standing on garden causes compaction of the soil, and that takes out the air, and that's a problem for your soil, and it's just not the way to go. So you need to be able to make sure you can reach into the garden. And if it is too wide, you can put some boards across or something so you can actually get onto that soil, into the garden without standing on the soil. Really important that you don't stand on the soil. And if you've got kids who are gardening with kids, they love walking on the soil. So that if they've got paths and boards, they'll walk on those. But they're not very good about remembering just not to walk on soil. They do need some sort of an edge, but they can be built straight onto the ground. You just need to dig around define the edge by digging with a spade and making a bit of a defined line and chopping off the grass and stuff that might invade from the ground level. So if you don't have edging, you can still build them on the ground quite successfully. You might find that your layers get quite big and you might have to sort of push them back onto the garden, but there's no reason why you can't just dig your shape out with a spade, cut off the grass that might invade, and make sure you keep that channel clear to keep the grass from getting back on. So you can use rocks or bricks, or I've seen sheets of ColourBond. Hay bales are good. Hay bales they're not permanent, but they build a nice bit of height around the garden, and as they break down, they can go onto the garden. So they're a good sort of thing that you could replace, and they're just constantly building up your soil. Pavers, untreated wood. Try and avoid, well, treated wood's hard to get now anyway, but try and avoid treated wood, and avoiding tyres as well, because tyres can leach stuff into your soil. And you can also use the commercial raised metal beds and just layer inside of those. You can get it hold them. They're quite expensive, but sometimes people get rid of them, and you can find them free, maybe. Okay, so the layers that you put in there are just materials, either carbon, browns, or nitrogen, that are greens. And it's best to have a bit more browns and greens in your mix, but actually it's not that big of a deal, just as long as you've got some layers. It's the same sort of laying as you'd use in a compost bin. It's your browns and your greens, your carbon and your nitrogen. So if you're going to build your bed on a lawn, a grassy area, you need to smother off those weeds and grass. And the way to do that is just to put down a layer, a solid layer of cardboard or newspaper, without any gaps in between. So the big boxes you get, like fridges and stuff, and are perfect because they're really big. You don't have to do, just put it down. If you're using newspaper, then just need to have 5 or 6, 7, 8, 9 layers of newspaper. Make sure that your edges are overlapping, so there's no chance for that grass to get up through there, because that grass will find any place where there's any light and will come up through and be in the middle of your garden. So your aim is to smother off grass. That when you're doing that, your grass does break down and provides nutrient as well. So it's actually building up your soil as well, and you're not breaking down that understory soil, the soil that's underneath. So you're keeping a structure and keeping all your microbes in there. So it sort of all works to support that layer in the end, even though it does get a bit anaerobic underneath, but it will come good and it will be part of the garden as it all breaks down. But you just make sure that no light can get in there and that the weeds can't get through. If there's any sticky tape on your cardboard, take it off. It doesn't break down. You'll be digging up for years if you don't take it off when you put it down. And the cardboard is particularly good because the worms like to breed inside of the corrugations. If you can get corrugated cardboard, that's really good. Make sure the smothering layer comes right to the edges of your garden, so there's no light around the edges. And just water it in really well, so it's nice and heavy and sits on that soil really well. Okay, so that's your smothering layer. If you're using, if you've got a hard surface, you probably don't need to do that either. But some cardboard will help to introduce some air into the bottom of the garden. So it's not too bad to have particularly cardboard underneath, just to get a bit of air there at the bottom of the garden, because all the soil, your microbes need that air in their soil. So the next layer would be a woody layer of sort of dry sticks or something sort of loose, but a bit of depth. And this is a layer that also allows air to be underneath your layers, and it will collect water as well. You can use some biggish pieces or some thickish sort of branches that will take a while to rot down. It helps to give continual feed to the biota in that soil. And then just water that down. So everything's got plenty of water. So you're watering every layer's got to get watered down just to settle it in and get the water there, get the moisture into that stuff. So then you're just layering on. So you've got green matter and your brown matter. So your green matter might be leaves, green council mulch, like wood chip. Wood chip is really good for the soil. Horse and cow manures, green garden waste like spent crops, someone's pulled out their cabbages or whatever. Hedge trimmings, fresh lawn trimmings, compost, active compost. They're all your nitrogen. There's some examples of nitrogen type stuff. Your brown matter is green, dry leaves, like, there's lots of grevilleas dropping leaves at the moment. That's perfect. Straw, hay, some coffee grounds, sugarcane mulch, anything that's brown, dry, that's your brown, so that goes on there. You can also use torn up newspaper as well, if you want to go in there. So you're just layering, so you put a layer of green leaves and maybe a layer of straw, then a layer of council mulch maybe, and some horse manure, and then a layer of hay and whatever you've got. And it doesn't really matter, just whatever you've got that you can find. You might have to buy something depending on how big your garden is, but you might be able to find enough stuff around. At the moment, there's a fair few bits of leaves around, which is helpful. So you can also add some lime and some blood and bone to that mix, just to build up the nutrients a bit, make sure that it's got everything it needs, so it's fairly balanced. And you need to add some soil, some soil from someone's garden as well, because that's where you get your worm eggs and your biota, all the microorganisms that you need to get everything working. So throw in some handfuls of soil as well, and finish it off with a brown layer of mulch to suppress the weeds. So you shouldn't have too many weeds, but you can get weeds out of manures. Horse manure and that sort of thing can have weeds, and also green lawn clippings can have seed in them as well, so they can come up and just pull them out. They shouldn't be too hard to pull out, but just remember, get them out, because they say 1 year's seeds is 7 years weeds. That's an old saying for old people. So you just don't want any weeds in there at all. But you shouldn't have too much weed, and it should be very easy to get it out, as long as it's not that grass coming up from underneath. Okay, now, so when you've done that, you can sit back for a while and let that break down before you plant it up. But if you can't wait, you can actually plant straight into that by getting some soil. Maybe buy a bag of soil from the supermarket, from the wherever you get them from, and just get your seedlings using things that are shallow rooted, like lettuces and some herbs and that sort of thing. You can just dig a bit of a hole, pull a bit of a part, put some soil in there and drop in those seedlings, and water them up, and they should be fine to take off in that. So if you don't want to wait for, say, 4 or 5 weeks for that the whole thing to sort of start working, we can plant straight away. And it should work for, it should produce a good crop for the first, couple of years. You will see that it will break down. So as those things decompose and work and the worms get in and stuff, it'll drop down. So you'll need to add some more layers to keep the layer built up. And you should give it sort of a good couple of centimetres of cow manure every year, just to keep the nutrient level high there and get everything growing. There's lots of information on the internet about no-dig gardening. Esther Deans was the Sydney sider in the 80s who started promoting the method. It's been around for a long time. Anything by Sustainable Gardening Australia or the ABC's Gardening Australia is good. And there's a fellow called Charles Dowding in England, who is British, so it's different weather, but he's got some really good information there, and he's the main proponent of the method over there at the moment. So very up to date. So, but it is different weather. It's just worth having a look at his videos though. His name is Charles Dowding. Okay, is there anything you want to ask about that? No.
Have any recommendations on native plants to plant?
In a no-dig garden? Well, I guess, I don't know. Let's think. I'm not really sure. Well, it depends on your aspect, of course. I've got at home, I've got a lovely Davison plum growing. It's very happy, it needs a bit of shade. You can grow the spinach, what's it called? New Zealand spinach is not called that, it's got another name. Warrigal greens are really good. They're actually very good to grow. They're pretty hardy. They grow well by this in the seed type aspect, and they're good ground cover. So they're really easy to grow, and you can eat them. So you treat them like a normal spinach, but you should really, if you're going to eat lots, you should blanch them because they have oxalic acid in them. Other things to grow that, if you want to get those layers mixing, is some comfrey, which is not native, of course, and some rhubarb to get the mixer layers through. Other native saltbush is good to grow, quite quick growing. Some of the mint bush, the Prosantheras, the mint bushes are quite good to grow. Yeah, so there's a range of things to go. There's a very good nursery at East Gresford, Noel Jupp, who sells everything that grows between the Barringtons and the sea in the native plants, and he's got great advice for wherever you are, whatever place you're in. He provides our council with all of their seedlings. So there are a couple of good native nurseries around that you can get information from. Yeah, but definitely start with warrigal greens, and they do tend to pop up all over the place once they start. They seed really easily. They're a great thing to start with. Yeah. Yep.
Do you have any recommendation on like pests that come and would eat the garden? Any way to stop them?
Pests, yeah. So pests that eat your crops, you mean? Yeah. Yeah. Well, there are lots of pests that eat your crops. Probably the most persistent is the white cabbage butterfly in the spring, which is they're probably breeding away now. They're looking for any cabbage crops, so cauliflowers, your kales, that sort of stuff. They're best dealt with by netting. Most of the insects are best dealt by exclusion netting. So you can use the polypipe tunnel thing. So you just get the polypipe and stick it in, and then get the white insect exclusion net to cover that with. Tomatoes, you can make exclusion net bags. The trouble with spraying even organic sprays is that they're not very selective. So if you're spraying for one pest, you're going to kill a whole range of other things, whether it's organic spray or not. So if you can exclude them, that's the best method. It seems to be the most successful I've found. Most things. You can get soil pests, which they're a bit difficult to get rid of, nematodes and things. So there's a whole range of companion planting you can put in to try and keep those things under control. And there's aphids, of course, which you can just blast off and hope you get some ladybirds. Sometimes there are some things that just like broad beans can be overwhelmingly gobbled up by aphids, and I just chop them in and use them as a mulch. So sometimes you don't want to give up. Sometimes if it's too bad, you give up to the insects, take it out and compost it. There's always a use for anything that comes out of the garden. Composting is if it can't do anything else with it, just compost it. If you can't eat it, then compost it. So Yeah, and it's always building your soil. Yeah.
To do a lot with mint because mint takes over a whole garden.
Sorry?
Mint, it takes over the whole garden whenever
Oh,
it's
it does. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, put it in a pot. Yeah, put it in a
Yep.
pot. But yeah, yeah. But it's great to have the just keep it in a pot. Yeah. If you've got a mint taking over a garden, you've probably got a nice moist garden then because it does like to be wet. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Was a growing container. So I grow in container. So as I said, most of my garden at school is made by the no dig method because there's no way I could dig up that clay. But then I've also got some growing container growing at school, but I'm using the large IBCs. You know, those things you see on farms that would have contained maybe pesticide, or they used to convert cart oil and stuff. They're 1 meter cube with a metal frame around them. You cut them in half and you can flip them over and use them as a container garden. You can use them as a wicking bed as well, but that's a bit of another story. So I do use containers and wicking beds because at school gives me a break in the long holidays. I can fill those wicking beds up and they can water themselves. But I'm going to talk about smaller containers mostly because I'm thinking that maybe the audience here would be in a unit or something and just wanting to grow something on their balcony and locked in the pandemic. So I'm thinking about smaller containers here. All right, so why would you grow in containers? Well, obviously because you haven't got any other choice probably, or maybe you're going to move around and you want to take stuff with you, or it's not your place and you're not allowed to put things in the garden. There's lots of reasons why you might, or just because you might like to have plants close to your house rather than down the backyard. You might just want to have them, just as you walk out the back door, so you can just grab your mint and your basil without having to get your feet wet. So there's lots of reasons to do it. I'm talking mostly about growing food in containers because growing other sorts of plants in containers, there's a whole range of indoor plants that will grow in low light and that sort of thing, and they're different. So I'm just generally talking about growing food in containers. Yeah. Okay. So it's the same rules with growing in containers as it is in the garden. The plants like 6 hours of sun, so that's just basic. You can't really get away with it. If you want to grow food, you have to have sun. They're not going to grow anything in the dark. It's going to go, long and die and salt. So they need to have 6 hours of sun a day. And you can move containers. You can move them around. So if you've got them in one place in the winter, you can move them out in the summer, or vice versa. So that's another advantage of having containers. It's movable, so you can you can chase your sun if you need to. There are lots of containers you can use. Anything really. There's a dumpster. I've got a pizza place across the road, and they buy these these things in tins. So this is a really nice tin because it's actually got the printed labels printed on there. So if you put some holes in the bottom of that, that's quite a good amount of soil in there. You could grow like a parsley or basil or something in there, and not have to pay for it all. Of course, that would rust though, so you need to make sure that you had that in the right spot. It would only last a year, but still quite a good way, quite a good sort of container. There's a pineapple one there as well, a good size. But buckets, anything that contains things, even bags. You can grow things in bags. A lot of people grow potatoes in bags to keep them out of the main garden. They're just the polypropylene bags. I've got one in the back of the car that had chicken feed in it, so you just fill it up with some soil, fold down the top, and put it in place, and it will grow things for you. So you don't have to really spend much money on buying containers. Old buckets, polystyrene boxes, they're all good for growing things. Just the old black plastic pots that people often have stacks of somewhere or other are good to use. And you can also get nice ones if you go to garage sales and stuff, if they ever become a reality again, lockdown. They all need to have some drainage holes in them, so you need to put holes in the bottom of them. But you can make a self-watering pot by putting a layer of scoria or some sort of drainage material in the bottom, and then having a drainage hole here just above that. So you've got no drainage holes in the bottom, just some gravel or scoria, so say to here, a drainage hole here. So when it's filled up with the water, the excess can drain out. On top of that gravel, you'd put a layer of geotextile or shade cloth, so that separates the gravel that you've got in here from the soil that would be here. And so you can water from the top. The water goes down through the soil, sits in this reservoir down here, drains out if it's too much, and the water wicks up through the potting mix. And so that's a way of having containers that will look after themselves a bit more than if you don't have a reservoir. You can buy containers that do that too, but you can make anything into a wicking type of pot like that. So that's a good thing to think about. So that's one thing. So the soil for containers. So when you're doing container growing, you need to use different. You can't really use soil out of your garden because it's too heavy and dense. In your growing containers, everything needs to be able to drain through. So you need to buy or get hold of some or make some decent sort of quality potting mix, and it needs to have some nutrients in it. You can make potting mix by just using coir, which is this like it's you know, you've probably all seen it before. It's like it's coconut stuff, and you swell it out, it swells up, and it holds water really well, but also drains as well. So that's a basic element in all potting mixes, but you need more than that because you need some nutrients in your soil if you're going to grow things in containers. So the potting mixes normally have some coir in them, some bark and some sand, and they also have nutrients. And there are special ones for vegetables as well. So you can buy a bag of special, you know, tomato mix or whatever mix, and that's got particular sorts of things like phosphorus and stuff that tomatoes need. So what should you grow? You should grow what you want to eat. Don't grow anything you're not going to eat. It's no good growing something if you're not going to eat it. So things like herbs are really good to grow because they're quite expensive, and you know, you might only want a tiny bit and the rest of it is thrown away. They're actually, some of them, if you look at the price, then they charge about $300 a kilo for herbs. If you break it down, they're very expensive because they're very labor intensive to grow, but you know, to pick and pack. But parsley, basil and chives are quite easy to grow, and they also smell beautiful. So when you go past them, they're wonderful to have in the house or outside. Quick growing greens like rocket and lettuce, climbing beans, anything that climbs is quite good because they, you know, you just have to have good soil and a good potting mix and they will grow up. So, and they're good space wise. So climbing beans and cucumbers and spring onions are quite good. Kale, tomatoes are good, the taller ones that grow up. You can tie them up and you can put bags over the fruit and have some good tomatoes. Silver beet and chilies are quite good. Ginger and turmeric are also good in containers. They tend to like to have their rhizomes confined. So I grow them in containers in the garden just so I know where they are, and they like a lot of water. So you actually, you know, can see where they are and give them plenty of water. And yeah, so there's anything, but you really want, some like carrots and stuff, not so good in containers because they need a lot of depth. So yeah, so quick growers and things that you're going to eat, and herbs as well. And remember that everyone has their losses. So when you're growing anything, you know, we all have things that don't work, don't come up, you know, just don't thrive. So it's just a learning curve, really. The thing about them all is they do need lots of water because you've only got a small amount of soil there or medium there, growing medium. They need to be watered constantly. So that's the difference between having a garden in the ground and having it in a pot. You find your water needs they need constant watering. And they also need fertilizing because you're constantly watering them. What washes out all the nutrients. So they need to have regular feeds of things like, you know, fish emulsion, sea salt, those sorts of things, just to keep that nutrient up because you're constantly washing it through the system when you water them. So I use sea salt, and I also like fish-based things like Charlie carp. That's really good. So I don't really know what else to say, really. It's basically, there's lots of great places to find information about growing containers. Indira and I don't know if you've heard of her. She's a bit of an icon in the old days, but she has written a couple of books on growing things in balconies, and I think she lives in Sydney. I think she's Sydney, so she's, you know, it's Australian based, and she's got lots of good ideas about what to do and how to do that. There's lots of stuff on the internet again about growing things in containers, and but just make sure you stick to Australian websites mostly, because you can find that information from America and other places can be doesn't work at all in terms of our season. So except for the no dig guy, Charles Dowding, his ideas are quite good, but on the whole, make sure you're on an Australian website, particularly if you in the valley, try and be not too much. Remember, if it's Melbourne, it's different to what we have here. So our conditions are different to other places in the country. Basically, I think that's really all. I don't know. You can find it all. So just have a go and just get out there and have a go. It's very good for your mental health to have things growing around you, and it's good for your physical. Just be up and watering and things is good for you as well, rather than sitting around all day. And it's definitely worth seeing how you go. See if they get those green thumbs going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely is good.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. That's about all I've got to say.